Okay, 3, 2. Oh wait, sorry. You go.
I was going to say, am I welcoming us to Sound Politics?
You're welcoming us. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Do I go? Should I do it now?
Do it whenever you're ready.
Okay. Welcome to Sound Politics. I'm Jeannie Lindsay.
Libby's out today, and I'm Scott Greenstone. And a few years ago, I was interviewing this old Tacoma Democrat, Steve Kirby, who was retiring after a long career in the state legislature. And he told me something I still think about a lot. The job of the legislature, what all those state lawmakers are doing right now in Olympia, is not to pass bills, he said, but to kill them.
Slicing and dicing, because there are so many everywhere.
There are so many. Yeah. You hear some version of this sometimes. I mean, he's not the only person to say this, right? The job is not so much to pass good bills, but kill bad ones, because there's just a lot of bad ones. Good or bad, it's bill killing season in Olympia. Kill Bill. We got a sound for that.
Worry not, everyone named Bill. We are talking about legislation. So,
right.
And yeah,
you're safe.
We just passed these two small little hoops that all of the hundreds of bills introduced this year are trying to get through. There was a cutoff for policy bills. That's just stuff that's changing the law. And then there was another cutoff for bills in these fiscal and transportation committees. That's pretty much stuff that has a price tag on it.
Yeah, in other words, budget stuff. And I am so tired of talking about the budget, Jeannie. I can't even, it's the state budget is in a hole. The federal cuts, right, because of the debt, the federal debt. It feels like we're all just talking about, every episode is about the budget. And I get it. It's important. I'm just I'm so tired. I'm proposing a rule. I hope you will agree to this. Every time, instead of saying budget, we just play the Kill Bill sound. Can we play that again? And I have to note, I know this sound is not the Kill Bill theme per se. It's actually a theme from the show Ironside, written by Seattle's very own late, great Quincy Jones. But Kill Bill, work with me here.
This is going to be a really bad time for the next couple of weeks for you because the B word is going to be looming large.
Give me a reprieve for one day. It's going to be never ending. Every time a bill died because of money issues, we're going to play the Kill Bill sound instead of saying the B word, the budget word.
I don't know how we're going to avoid saying the B word.
The B word. Yeah, there's too many B words. Bills that die.
Yeah.
Bills that die.
Yeah, we got to talk about bills that died because bills rarely die forever. Some will come back year after year until they eventually pass in some form or another.
Yes, and I want to talk about that. But first, why are we calling these bills dead? And really, when do we know a bill is dead? Ever?
Well, we'll know when bills are dead for sure once, the session is over. But the reason why we call them dead right now is because there's lots of legislation that won't be considered anymore this year, but it could come up next year, like we just said,
right,
or another time. But then also with how do I talk about the B word without when we're talking about money?
Cue the sound.
When we're talking about money, legislation can come back because there are a number of ways that lawmakers have to keep considering those things as they're dealing with money things. This is so hard.
They have to balance, right? They have to pass a balanced B word. And so, they can consider more money-making bills.
Right.
Revenue bills, taxes. We can do this. I believe in us. Rapid round. Give us a little flavor of some of the little ones that died so far this session, Jeannie.
Yeah, so one of the ones that got some attention right before cutoff was State Representative Strom Peterson's bill to create a commission to redesign the state flag by 2028. It was catching some heat by Republicans. They were convinced that this was the first step in erasing any trace of George Washington from the state, including the name.
Interesting. I was going to say we should just go and call it I don't know, we could call it the state of Columbia. That was the original idea, right?
Yeah, I mean, it would avoid the confusion with being the other Washington, but
Yeah.
then we would become the other Columbia?
Oh, the state of Columbia instead of the District of Columbia? Yeah, that's awkward.
Right. And so, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that they could approach this, but Soundside was hearing from Peterson that he's got his eyes on this issue next session and isn't planning to wave a white flag just yet.
He's stuck with green and, yellow?
For now. But along those lines, I mean, state symbol bills are dying in our arms. We still sadly have no conclusion to the longstanding debate over whether the razor clam or the gooey duck should take the seat as the official state clam.
I'm imagining a gooey duck, or maybe both, a gooey duck and a razor clam dying in your arms.
It sounds very gross.
It is. I love that last time you came on here, you talked about the gooey duck because that's the Evergreen State College's
right
mascot. And it looks like this big green hot dog. It is not fun. There are so many more that we should just mention. We'll mention some of them, serious ones, not so serious ones. I want to do an Oscars in memoriam segment for them. Just run through them briefly while we play Mozart's Requiem. Is that what they played under the in memoriam segment on Sunday? And so just with the caveat, these have been reported dead. We have not reported on these ourselves, but they've been reported in the media. Jeannie, go.
So the one measuring cow farts and burps, essentially methane emissions from cows, probably dead.
A loan repayment program for public defenders, dead.
And an unemployment program for immigrants in the U.S. without legal authorization, probably not going.
Clothes and textiles disposal management, not going forward.
Some changes to regulations of wood-burning stoves, also dead.
A bill to add messages to ballot boxes saying don't tamper with this, about $1,000 to sign. R.I.P. Lifespan January to February 2025. We hardly knew ye.
And a right to civic engagement for people in prisons and state hospitals, it's stalled for now.
I feel like we just walked through a legislative graveyard, so let's stop at the headstone that says free school lunches.
We're going to get haunted after this.
Or haunted by angry people that were mad their bills died. So there has been a lot of talk from the legislature and Governor Bob Ferguson on making, big moves in education. This free lunch bill, which would have added dedicated funding for making, school lunches free in the state, totally stalled out. This feels like a priority. It's a big piece of a national conversation. Why did it die?
Yeah, I mean, they've been talking about school lunches for years, and there's been some movement in the legislature to offer more free school meals to students, some expansion of programs, but making it free for every student, still, they just haven't gotten there. I mean, this was something that the governor named in his speech, and there was a lot of bipartisan support from it. Just looking at the people signed on to that legislation, it's a popular idea. But, I even talked with the House Finance Chair, Rachel Berg, who was sponsoring the bill in the House. And a week before that bill's sort of demise, I guess, she was still really optimistic about it. But it really, again, boils down to the B word, the money stuff.
Play the sound.
When we were, and I say we as like the press corps, I mean, we talk with Democratic leaders pretty routinely for their weekly media availabilities. And as they were talking about their priorities in education, they've sort of gravitated toward the big three as determined by education advocates, the school associations that are really pushing for, the needs of schools this legislative session. And those groups have sort of gravitated around the big three in education, which is special education funding, materials and supplies, and transportation. And while everybody really likes, well, I won't say everybody, but a lot of people really like the idea of free school meals, it's not in the big three. And, when you've got a giant B word, problem, and spending is really tight. It just wasn't one of those things that leadership or the folks who are even advocating for education felt like they could also ask for that in addition to these other really critical needs. So
valiant effort not to say the B word.
I know, it's so hard. I'm trying to figure out more creative ways to talk about this, but it's difficult. But Scott, you've done some reporting on legislation here, and I'm curious about two bills that had to do with Tesla. Tesla obviously has been in the news with widespread protests against Elon Musk. There's been vandalism. And I'm curious what you learned about, I guess, why the legislature was caring about Tesla in your reporting.
Yeah, so we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I went over these two bills, introduced by Senator Rebecca Saldana. Short version is Tesla is the only automaker in the state that can have stores. Every other automaker has to sell through independent auto dealerships, okay? And so that was secured like 10 years ago when Tesla was the only electric automaker, and lawmakers were basically like, well, let's give them this loophole because we want people to buy electric vehicles. But now there's a lot of other automakers making electric vehicles, including, Ford and them. So they basically say this is not fair. This got caught up in the whole thing with Elon because it was introduced on the day of the inauguration. He did a salute. A lot of people said that looks like a Sieg Heil to me. He said it's not. Basically, the problem was that Saldana introduced two bills, and she's the senator from Seattle. One of them would have killed the exemption for Tesla. One of them would have opened it up to every other electric-only automaker like Rivian or maybe like Polestar. And so everyone kind of hated something about one of these two bills. So like the electric, automakers or like the climate advocates were basically like, we do not want you to kill this exemption. So we're testifying against that bill. And then the independent auto dealerships who don't want to lose, more business or whatever, even though, the climate advocates say they won't. They testified against the other bill. So it was like crossfire, and they all kind of like shot down each other's bills. And that can happen. So yeah.
Was this at all? Did you hear people talking about this being a response to Doge and some of the frustration that people are feeling about sort of his federal cuts and his new role in the D.C. administration?
I think it was. Saldana said she's been working on this for years, since before he became kind of a right-wing provocateur, if we want to call him that. But she said she did get more sponsors around the time of the inauguration and, some last-minute Democrats signing on. So that's definitely part of it. I also just want to plug a story I did. We can put the link in the show notes this week about Tesla owners in Seattle. They're not doing well. They do not feel, a lot of people are like cutting their logos off of cars. So like liberals in general are just, they're definitely upset at Elon Musk around here. I would say Washington State, not a big fan of Musk right now, even though we have more Teslas, like Seattle has more Teslas than any city in the nation except for San Francisco and Honolulu.
Which is such a pivot from several years ago. Like, not to spend more time on this, but I remember when I was interning in Olympia, one of the first things that I covered was our now former Governor Jay Inslee test driving a Tesla. And it was like this big deal, and everyone was super excited about it. And wow, I wonder if anybody thought we would be here now in the year of our Lord 2025.
No. Okay. But back to dead bills. We have to talk about a dead bill some people call the initiative killer bill, which has now been killed before it could kill initiatives. So much death. What is going on here, Jeannie?
Yeah, killer bill. This one honestly was really, really interesting. This legislation, the so-called initiative killer, it was one that was attempting to sort of add more verification to the process of signature gathering, right, to make sure that people who signed initiatives were actually residents and voters in the state. It wasn't, the top priority for Democrats. I asked them about this, if they were going to try and push this forwards, and, they agreed with the idea behind it. But and I should say legislative Democrats.
Yeah.
Leadership agreed with the idea behind it, but it wasn't sort of their top priority in a session where they've got a lot of other big priorities.
And the Secretary of State, who's a Democrat, he did not like it.
Yeah, and that was pretty significant. I mean, he talked about this in the public hearing on it and basically said it was a solution looking for a problem. And this, again, it was another thing that would have had an additional cost to it. There was a price tag. So in addition to the bipartisan pushback, the people who engage in the initiative process absolutely hating it, worrying that it would add liability for signature gatherers, the Democratic Secretary of State being like, please don't do this, it's going to cost a lot of time and money, all of these things just sort of led to its demise.
Yeah. The solution in search of a problem, I mean, the problem for Democrats is a guy named Brian Haywood, right? He's a hedge fund manager. He paid a bunch of money to get these initiatives last year. I mean, the reason they're not trying to kill initiatives, but make sure, like, put all these different, requirements on them is because they want, I mean, let's just be honest. The argument is that they want to make it a little bit harder for someone like Brian Haywood to pour a bunch of money into his initiative signature gathering campaigns and get stuff on the ballot. And I'm bringing that up because I want to take a little detour here. There's a new initiative out that has to do with the Parents' Bill of Rights. It's a little bit of a complicated story, but I want to start. Can you just catch us up again on what the Parents' Bill of Rights does or did last year when originally Brian Haywood gathered a bunch of signatures and it got passed into law?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this was Initiative 2081, and it essentially codified more than a dozen rights for parents to oversee and access their kids' education. So curriculum stuff, opting in and out of lessons, access to records. It sped up some of the timeline that schools needed to be responsive to those records. It said all kinds of things. And really the goal was for the initiative folks and for Brian Haywood to, make sure that parents had the oversight that they believe they should have over what's going on with their kids in schools.
And so that passed, but then Democrats are like changing it right now in the legislature, and that's still alive, that effort, that new sort of edited Parents' Bill of Rights. Is that right?
Yeah, there are a couple of pieces of legislation that attempt to sort of bring the Parents' Rights Initiative that is in law right now into alignment with other regulations. One of the big issues that Democrats have said about the Parents' Rights Initiative, I mean, they didn't write it, obviously, so It was sort of this legal language plopped into one part of the law. But because it touches on all of these other things like, medical records and, all of these different issues, they're essentially saying that they need to bring it into alignment with regulations that exist in other parts of law, either state or federally. And so there's some cleanup language in there, but the real sticking point this year is sort of this rollback of what the Parents' Rights Initiative put into law, where, it basically grants parents access to any medical, any school-based medical or mental health record. And I would say the biggest part of the fight over the parents' rights bills this year is that aspect that would sort of remove that automatic granting of permissions over those sorts of records.
And there's been a whole firestorm over this online. It's a lot, but the short version is like Democrats are kind of rolling back this part of it. Republicans and Brian Haywood are mad about that, and so they're gathering signatures for another Parents' Bill of Rights initiative that they kind of want to put on the ballot potentially in November. Is that right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, the initiative they filed would actually repeal Senate Bill 5181, which still has not become law or anything like that. So it's sort of like preempting, like you're considering this bill, legislature, and this initiative that Let's Go Washington just filed would repeal it if voters, if it qualifies for the ballot and voters decide to approve it, should it end up on the ballot later this year. So
an initiative to kill a bill that is still alive.
Yeah.
Okay, so sometimes a bill can be revived by a guy like Brian Haywood, or a lawmaker who just does not give up and introduces it again every year, right? Or a constituency like people who want limits on how much landlords can raise your rent, right? Their bills have died every session for years, and they keep coming back, and they may pass this year, I think. Can we just, before we go, can we just talk about the stuff that's still alive? The big ones?
Yeah. The conversation about rent limits is still alive. It's been sort of a quiet conversation after there was a lot of action early on this session. We're waiting to see sort of what happens around, next week's cutoff, the House of Origin cutoff that we talked about. So that one is certainly one to watch, in addition to these parents' rights bills that we were just talking about. And honestly, the next several weeks are going to be a lot about money stuff as well. So anything that's talking about taxes or revenue, that is all still on the table. And we'll see sort of what happens there.
Taxes, revenue. Wait, play the sound one more time before we go.
Oh, does that count?
No, not really. I just wanted to play the sound again.
You're obsessed.
I'm a big Kill Bill fan. Jeannie Lindsay, you've been my ghostly guide through the graveyard of Olympia today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's it for Sound Politics today. Today's show was produced by Alec Cowan, who trigger-happy finger on the Kill Bill cue. Our editor is Gabe Spitzer. I'm KUOW Politics reporter Scott Greenstone. And this show is only possible because of your support. So please think about it right now. Think about a donation. Go to the show notes or KUOW.org/politics. See you next week.